Welcome to Whisperer, your portal to the bone, chilling mysteries of the graveyard. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button as we embark on terrifying journeys amongst the tombstones. Embrace your fears and stay tuned for spine-tingling stories from beyond the grave. In the small, isolated town of Willow's End, tucked away on the edge of an ancient, sprawling forest, there was a cemetery known as Hillcrest Haven. While most cemeteries are a peaceful resting place for the departed, Hillcrest Haven carried a disturbing reputation. For nearly a century, rumors of supernatural activity and vengeful hauntings had plagued its grounds. The cemetery's unsettling atmosphere was heightened by its gruff, reclusive caretaker, Horace Craven, who seemed almost as much a part of the graveyard as the tombstones themselves. Horace was an old man who had spent his entire life living in a small stone cottage on the cemetery grounds, tending to the graves with an almost obsessive fervor. He was rarely seen outside the cemetery, but every now and then he would appear in town to collect supplies. His sunken cheeks, sharp gray eyes, and crooked posture made him an unnerving sight. But although he was feared, the people of Willow's End respected Horace's dedication to his work and the cemetery. As the years rolled by, however, the town's population began to dwindle. Hillcrest Haven, once overflowing with the town's dearly departed, was now mostly forgotten. The few families left in Willow's End struggled to maintain their businesses, with little thought given to the neglected graves in the cemetery. Only Horace remained, tending the crumbling tombstones and cleaning the moss-covered mausoleums, his resentment for the townspeople growing each day. Word spread far and wide about the haunted Hillcrest Haven, and as the legends grew, it began to attract visitors of a darker kind: vandals, thrill-seekers, and followers of the occult. Rude graffiti, broken tombstones, and mysterious symbols found on the graves became commonplace, and poor Horace was left to clean up the mess. His pain and anger deepened until the bitterness inside him consumed all other aspects of his being. Horace had taken an oath, a solemn vow to guard the tranquility of Hillcrest Haven and to protect the dignity of those buried within. As his final years approached, the old man found himself spending more and more time alone in the cemetery, drawing power from the ever-increasing wrath that lived within his heart. One rainy evening, Horace was discovered dead in his cottage, slumped over in his creaky old armchair. His face contorted in a cold, spiteful scowl that spoke of an unfulfilled promise. With no family and no friends, only a small group of townspeople came to bury him, a gravekeeper's simple funeral. Yet, from the day Horace Craven was buried, strange things began to happen at Hillcrest Haven. Whispers amongst the town told of eerie lights seen within the cemetery at night, unexplained screams heard between the tombstones, and chilling tales of unearthly energies swirling around Horace's grave. The old man had indeed become a vengeful force, sworn to protect his beloved cemetery and the souls of those interred within, at any cost. And so it happened that any who violated the peace of Hillcrest even found themselves at the mercy of Horace's vengeful spirit. Vandals discovered the cemetery a terrifying place as they encountered unseen hands grabbing at their hair, agonizing wails echoing around them, and a long, bony finger, invisible yet indomitable, scraping down the sides of tombstones, sending shivers down their spines. Gradually, the townspeople began to notice a pattern. Misfortunes, accidents, and worse befell the families of those who trespassed or disrespected the sanctuary of the cemetery. Yet through all the terror and anguish, Horace Craven kept his promise, ensuring that those who dared disturb the sanctity of his graves would pay a terrible price. Those rotten souls who spent their final days tormented by Horace's relentless revenge would often be found with haunted, terror-stricken eyes, whispering tales of the vengeful gravekeeper that had dedicated his afterlife to pursuing them. The stories they told of midnight chases through the tombstones, ghostly apparitions in their homes, and heart-stopping visions in their dreams. spread like wildfire, and soon the town of Willow's End was gripped with a new fear they had once thought long buried. And so the legend of the Gravekeeper's revenge became a whispered urban myth in the town, ensuring that nobody dared stray from the safe, worn paths of the Hillcrest Haven Cemetery, lest they incur the wrath of Horace Craven, the vengeful spirit determined to protect the dignity of the dead for all eternity. Once upon a time, in a quaint village called Blackthorn Hollow, a grim legend passed down among its inhabitants never failed to send shivers down their spines. As the stories went, an ethereal funeral procession could be seen wandering the grounds of the old Willowbrook Cemetery every night, marching beneath the twisted shadows of the ancient willows and oaks that stood like silent sentinels for the dead. A recent transfer to Blackthorn Hollow, Alice found herself drawn to the village's dark legends from the moment she'd heard them. As an avid paranormal investigator with an insatiable curiosity, she longed to uncover the truth behind the story of the phantom funeral. Various eyewitness accounts claimed that the ghostly procession appeared as the clock struck midnight and would continue on its funeral march until the first light of dawn. These witnesses spoke of the eerie sounds of dirges and disembodied voices mourning a long-gone soul. On the eve of a moonless night, Alice mustered the courage to visit Willowbrook Cemetery alone in the hopes of witnessing the phantom procession herself. She set up her video camera and sound equipment near the edge of the cemetery, ensuring she had a clear view of the grounds. As she waited for midnight to approach, the suffocating silence filled the air with an unsettling tension. The moment the church bell chimed midnight, Alice felt a sudden chill sweep across the graveyard. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw a series of spectral figures emerging from the dense fog that had rolled in without warning. The ghostly figures emanated an eerie blue-white glow, and before her very eyes, Alice saw the long-rumored funeral procession begin its march. The spectral mourners consisted of people dressed in clothing from different eras, each having suffered the same tragic fate. It was said that decades, even centuries apart, those buried in Willowbrook Cemetery had all perished in mysterious and horrific accidents, their spirits forever tied to the place of their eternal rest. They carried an ornate, empty casket on their shoulders, symbolizing their collective grief and aimless wandering in the afterlife. Alice's hands shook as she adjusted her video camera to capture the ghostly spectacle, her heart thundering in her chest. She could hardly believe her eyes as she witnessed the supernatural scene unfold, with the procession meandering among the tombstones, growing increasingly tragic and sorrowful with every step. As she watched the scene, Alice found herself unable to look away, feeling a sense of deep grief for these pitiful lost souls. They filed through the cemetery, stopping at each grave as if hopelessly searching for a final resting place. Their wailing grew louder, intensifying the desperation that shrouded the ghostly gathering. Alice felt the mournful wails resonate within her chest, each melancholic note weaving itself into the very core of her being. Dawn crept upon the horizon, bringing with it dim rays of sunlight that slowly began to banish the darkness from the graveyard. The mournful dirge seemed to reach a crescendo, the ghostly figures growing more feverish in their futile search for eternal rest. Then, just as suddenly as they'd appeared, the phantom funeral began to fade away, their spectral forms dissolving like smoke in the breeze, until nothing remained but the cold, empty graves of Willowbrook Cemetery. Alice stood in the graveyard, shaken and speechless. She knew that she'd witnessed something extraordinary, an event that few people would ever be able to comprehend. In the days that followed, she reviewed her footage and audio recordings, sharing her findings with the intrigued inhabitants of Blackthorn Hollow. With Alice's evidence, the villagers were forced to confront the reality of the shadowy funeral that haunted their cemetery every night. The legend of the phantom funeral of Willowbrook Cemetery became more than just a tale to frighten children. It became a chilling reminder of the tragic souls that still lingered within the hallowed grounds of their final resting place. As time went on, the townsfolk's sorrow for the wandering spirits transformed into a deep reverence for the dead. They treated the graveyard with newfound respect and tended to the long-forgotten graves with care and devotion. Although the haunting procession continued to march in their eternal sadness, their presence served as a somber reminder that even beyond death, the sorrow and pain of tragedy might never be truly forgotten, and the souls of the departed might never find complete peace. In the distant corners of Gravestone County, there was an old cemetery known by the locals as Resting Spirits Cemetery. Among the aged and weathered tombstones, there was one grave that refused to be forgotten. The legend had it that this gravestone, nestled at the far edge of the cemetery beneath a gnarled ancient oak tree, was imbued with the power to fulfill wishes. In hushed voices, the townspeople whispered about the grave's sinister and mysterious origins, referring to it as the Wishing Grave. No one knew precisely when or how the legend began, but it had been passed down through generations, as parents warned their children not to step foot in the cemetery, especially near the Wishing Grave. The old folk would say that those who dared to defy the warning could certainly have their deepest desires granted, but at a terrible price. An unforeseen, dark consequence that would inevitably follow the fulfilled wish, causing more misery to the reckless wisher than they'd ever experienced before. Stephen, a young man burdened by a life of hardship and misfortune, had recently moved to Gravestone County as a last-ditch attempt to start anew. Despite his efforts to integrate into the town, he had grown less and less able to shake off the looming cloud of despair that followed him. He found himself intrigued by the mysterious tales of the cemetery and the Wishing Grave, reasoning that he had nothing left to lose. One stormy evening, Stephen mustered the courage to sneak into Resting Spirits Cemetery, just as the last light of day succumbed to the night. He made his way through the field of tombstones, his heart pounding as thunder roared through the sky. He felt a thrill of excitement, tinged with fear, as he made his way towards the fabled Wishing Grave. Upon reaching the spot, Stephen noticed that the grave appeared to be unique in comparison to the others around it. The tombstone itself was dark and of an unusual shape, its ornate details long worn away with age. It was cold to the touch and almost seemed to breathe, with a sinister energy all its own. Steeling himself in the shadow of the oak tree, Stephen closed his eyes and uttered his wish. "I wish to find happiness and be free from this pain I carry in my heart. I wish for my life to be filled with joy and good fortune." As he spoke the words, his skin prickled as if charged with electricity, and a faint yet intoxicating scent filled the air around him. The storm appeared to subside momentarily, as if the very heavens themselves had heeded Stephen's impassioned plea. Filled with newfound hope, he made his way back home and tried to put the eerie experience behind him. In the following days, Stephen's life began to change. He found a well-paying job, made friends among his co-workers, and even found himself falling in love with the beautiful woman who lived in the house adjacent to his. With everything that was happening, he had all but forgotten about his visit to the Wishing Grave. He was indeed finally happy. But as Stephen enjoyed these newfound blessings, seeds of darkness started to sprout within Gravestone County. Neighbors began reporting strange occurrences, like objects mysteriously moving or shattering, whispers and footsteps in the night, and a persisting sense of being watched even when alone. As each day passed, the dark and eerie occurrences only intensified. It wasn't long before Stephen could no longer ignore the sinister pattern unfolding around him. He realized that the consequences of his wish were not solely his to bear, but were inflicting the entire town with a relentless, malevolent force. In the darkest hour of his guilt and regret, Stephen sought out the only person he believed could help him. Agnes Owens, the town's oldest resident, who had lived in Gravestone County much longer than anyone else. As Stephen prepared to confess his actions to Agnes, he learned of her family's long-held secret, the origins of the Wishing Grave. The grave was that of Agnes' great-great-great-grandfather, a man so consumed by greed and ambition that he had dabbled in malevolent magic, making a Faustian pact with a dark and terrifying power in exchange for his worldly desires. The power Stephen had unwittingly unleashed was now tormenting the town, feeding off the fear and misery of its inhabitants. The weight of the curse rested on Stephen's shoulders alone, as the ghosts of the past seemed to crawl out of the shadows, threatening to tear the town apart. Stephen, filled with determination and resolve, ventured back to the Wishing Grave with Agnes. Together, they implored the unholy forces to take back the wish that had been granted and cease the torment they had wrought upon Gravestone County. As the sky above them crackled with thunder and lightning, the ground around the grave began to tremble. The air grew heavy with the scent of decay until just as suddenly as it had arrived, the energy subsided, leaving Stephen and Agnes trembling in the darkness. Over time, the ominous presence that had settled over the town began to dissipate, and Gravestone County slowly returned to its peaceful, unassuming existence. Stephen's newfound luck and happiness vanished just as quickly as it had appeared, and once again he was forced to face the reality that life rarely offers a supernatural escape from its hardships. He learned the grave lesson that no wish, however desperate or pure in intent, can ever be free from consequence. Stephen came to understand that true happiness and strength must be found from within, and not from the blood-stained earth of the Wishing Grave. As for the Wishing Grave, it remained hidden in the shadows of the old oak tree within Resting Spirit's cemetery, waiting in silence, tempting the next weary heart to speak their deepest desire, knowing that the darkness would again have its chance to bedevil the unsuspecting. Thank you for joining us on this story journey till the very end. Your feedback is extremely valuable to us as we continue to experiment with this format. Kindly share your thoughts by liking or disliking the content, and we'd love for you to express your opinions in the comments section, detailing what worked for you and what didn't. We also welcome suggestions for future scary stories, so feel free to let us know what you'd like to hear next. Be sure to vote for any comment that aligns with your preferred story idea as we craft terrifying tales catered to your requests.